I work with what I would call these regular people all the time. But when a regular person has a transformation where they learn to take great care of themselves and their well-being expands and expands and expands, all these things that we consider regular, being a teacher or being a nurse or being a parent or being a grandparent or whatever it is, they do it with 50, 100% more mojo, because slowly getting sicker and sicker and sicker is sort of like a wet blanket, and then gradually getting happier and healthier and happier and healthier and happier and healthier is like, if the sound was muted, it's like the sound coming back on, or if the color was black and white, it's like the color now being full color. And when they light up, it's awesome for them, and they're bringing more to everyone around them, and it's wonderful.
In an age where the complexities of healthcare often obscure straightforward paths to wellness, one man's dedication to truth and simplicity brings us back to the essentials of human health. Hey there, Health Feast listeners, Dr. Rock here. And in today's episode of the Health Feast, I'm thrilled to introduce Jason Gootman. Jason is a national board-certified health and wellness coach and a certified nutritionist and exercise physiologist. I first encountered Jason on LinkedIn, where his candid posts and discussions about health immediately caught my attention. Jason has profound insights into lifestyle medicine that challenge the prevailing norms of the healthcare system. He advocates for a model as straightforward as caring for a houseplant. Jason's philosophy is rooted in the concept of Salutogenesis, which focuses on promoting health and well-being rather than pathogenesis, which is the origin of disease. During our conversation, Jason shares his personal journey that shaped his professional ethos, a journey marked by early struggles with body image and excessive exercise, leading to his transformative approach to balanced health. His story is a testament to the power of self-acceptance and holistic well-being. Jason's approach to wellness coaching integrates psychological motivation, intrinsic self-worth, and the practical implementation of healthy habits. He highlights how establishing a harmonious relationship with oneself is crucial in actualizing a life of wellness. And he advocates for a compassionate, needs-based approach to health. Our discussion also delves into Jason's views on the healthcare system, prompting us to reconsider the conventional approach to health and wellness. This conversation bridges the gap between complex medical systems and the innate simplicity of living well. Jason's articulate, thoughtful dialogue offers not just food for thought, but a veritable feast for the soul, encouraging us all to embrace a lifestyle that genuinely nurtures health and happiness. So, whether you're going for a walk, perhaps ending your day with a relaxing cup of tea, this episode is the perfect companion. Prepare to be inspired and enlightened by Jason Gootman's visionary perspective on health, wellness, and the journey to a more harmonious life. Let's do the show. Jason, the man, the myth, the legend. Jason Gootman. I am so excited. This is the first time I am virtually meeting you, actually getting to talk to you. It's such an honor and really joy to get to meet you. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking.
Saying this in the introduction a little bit, but one of the things I love, Jason, is your brutal honesty. You know, you're what I call like the good kind of troublemaker. Because you, right? You look at, for example, our healthcare system and just kind of tell it like it is. And when I read what you write, I'm like, this is how we need to be talking about these things.
I think all of that's a fun and funny launch into our conversation, because you might get to know this about me during our conversation. If you spent more time with me, I'm sure you'd get to know this. I'm fundamentally a non-confrontational person. In fact, it's something I struggle with confrontation, even when it's necessary and helpful in life. and I just can't look away from truth and reality. Those two things sort of meet for me. And maybe that's why I've become I like that way you described it, the good kind of troublemaker. I just have an absolute need to dwell in truth and reality. And I wish it didn't sometimes cause trouble, but I'm okay with it sometimes causing trouble because causing good, it's, not to be too dramatic, but it's reducing suffering for people. And I don't think there's anything better we can do for each other.
Well, you're making people question their long held beliefs and their beliefs where they come from. Like, I'd say in healthcare, like for me, I'm a doctor. It's so much of what we're taught in medical school is the kind of diagnose and treat. It's all based on discovering what's wrong. The assumption, first of all, that there's something wrong and that we have to find it. No one else can find it. Only we can find it. And so you got all these people trained up into this system, and then everyone has this belief. It's like the Matrix. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. You are like the red pill, Jason, because you're really trying to help people escape that. So go ahead.
Oh, I appreciate that idea. And there's sort of a simple and a fancy way of red pilling ourselves out of that way of thinking. The fancy way, you might be familiar with this term. I'm not even sure I'm 100% pronouncing it right because you don't hear people talk about it. I've more read about it than I've heard people talk about in conversations, but the term is salutogenesis. And it goes back a few decades. And essentially it's a way of looking at wellness that has to do with considering what are all the factors that go into creating wellness. Its antonym is what, as I understand it, is at the roots of most medical training is pathogenesis, which is what you described, Rock, which is seeking for what is wrong and destroying it, essentially, to put it in simple terms, right? The simple way of thinking about salutogenesis, the analogy I use all the time is something like a houseplant. And a houseplant has certain needs. It needs water, it needs sunlight, it needs enough space, it needs nutritious nutrients in the soil that it's living in. And when those needs are met, the plant perks up. Someone goes away, they forget to tend to the plants, they forget to ask someone else to tend to the plants. They don't meet those needs, the plants wilt.
Are you looking at the plant in my background? Because that plant is dying.
I think of us people as not more complicated than that, although we think we're much more complicated, or we wouldn't think of ourselves as complicated, but more sophisticated than that plant on someone's kitchen counter. But we have a known set of needs that we have some understanding of, you as a physician, me as a wellness coach, nutritionist, and exercise physiologist. But most of, or at least much of, our sense of those needs, I'm talking collectively, is fairly common sense. A good way to see that a lot of this is common sense is in the popular study of the blue zones, right? People that are living well in the blue zones aren't doing so because
it's not rocket science. Yeah, it's not rocket science. Jason, I say the same thing all the time. They're walking most of the day, they're eating whole foods.
It's one of the reasons why it's essential to be delving into the truth and reality, because it is so profoundly simple, and all of the complex, fancy, intricate systems that are part of medicine and part of nutrition and part of exercise science almost function as distractions from what needs to get done. So I think it's very important to break things down to their simple nature.
Distractions. So like getting into the weeds of like diseases and disease processes, and those are like paths you wouldn't even have to take, that distractions, right? You're like doing all this extra thinking and, spending, and it's a distraction. Interesting. I want to back up and ask, I don't know your wellness journey, and you sort of allude to it on your website that you kind of hit a tough point in your life, and there was some need for transformation. So I'd love to hear about that, Jason.
The short story started as a teenager and finding myself overweight as an early teenager and not getting a lot of productive guidance or support with that, and sort of turning to pop culture for what to do with this. And pop culture throws at you a few things. What it basically throws at you diet, meaning like eat less,
Restriction.
exclusion and restriction, yes, and exercise like crazy. I essentially did different versions of that for the ensuing decade or so until my mid-20s. And on the outside, it looked like I was probably succeeding from a wellness perspective, especially by our society's standards. By my mid-20s, I was doing triathlons at a high level. So I had a muscular body, I had a lean body, and I was quote unquote very athletic by many people's standards until I wasn't, rock. So that sort of excluding and restricting combined with just really excessive exercise. And for me, it mostly, once I got out of those early teen years, it mostly turned into excessive exercise. I was exercising so much that I had to eat a lot.
Yeah, what was fueling that? Were you addicted to the feeling that the exercise gave you, or was it the identity? Or, I mean, that's pretty high level.
It was multi-level. I mean, I think on one level it was, as a 13-year-old, I unconsciously said to myself, I'm not going to be fat again because I was being teased and not getting help with that. And so from a social perspective, I was just determined to not be that. I coupled with that this idea that if I was very successful as an athlete, that would, make up for that insecurity that I took on, right? Everyone will like, winning trophies and things like that. And then common to eating disorders, common to exercise addiction, common to even subclinical challenging relationships with food and movement, there was a sense of control there. Is something I could do in a world that, at least from my perspective at that time in life, a lot of the other things felt out of my control.
Jason, this really resonates with me. I mean, I was overweight as a child, as a teenager, as an adult, up until 7-8 years ago. So my whole life. And even now, I still kind of have that back of my head fear. Am I going to regain weight? And less because I've changed my lifestyle. And so I understand the difference now. But yeah, I mean, I would go through these cycles. I lost a bunch of weight for my wedding, but it was through restriction and punishment. And I wanted to look good in the pictures. And then afterwards, just sort of regained it. And I wasn't athletic. I wasn't doing things to like really try and take control. I had sort of given up. I wonder, I mean, I also felt like growing up that, I was less than and treated to be other. And we're probably similar in age. I mean, I will say nowadays, like there are a lot more overweight. Unfortunately, I mean, there are a lot more overweight and obese kids who have obesity. And when I was a kid, wasn't the case, in the early 80s, probably similar for you, like in the 80s and 90s, like you stood out more and you developed that complex. That's what I hear is kind of so outwardly you're this fit triathloner, like, you're doing these crazy things. Like you said, you have this super fit body, and internally you're that scared, made to be felt different and outside child who's just like, I don't know, doing this to really ramp up their protection. It's like the protection that you give yourself.
Right. And so the challenge that was also a gift and is, at the root of the person you've come to know online today is really dealing with that. When my body started to break down from the excessive exercise, and to make a long story short, I was at a crossroads where I had to do two things. I had to put my body back together, and I had to deal with some of the questions you've already asked me of sort of like, why was I doing all that? What was really missing?
So what was going on with your body? Like, what were some of the injuries, complications that you were dealing with?
The stuff that was hardest to deal with were neuromusculoskeletal stuff. I say it broadly because it was sort of all over. And that in the very early stages were what would you'd consider, from a medical perspective, the cluster of symptoms associated with what's known as the overtraining syndrome. So chronic fatigue, oddly coupled with like insomnia, poor ability to sleep, I don't even know if I would have called it this at the time because it wasn't something I was super familiar with, but definitely had elements of something like depression. I think a way to describe it was just from a sort of neutral biological perspective. It was just like organism overload and organism sort of shut down in what the everything except the neuromuscular skeletal stuff cleared in seemed like forever at the time, but in retrospect, it didn't take that long. 6 months, something like that. 6 months, maybe a year at the most. But I had to work hard at healing the neuromuscular skeletal stuff for several years after that.
There was a reckoning. There was a reckoning.
It's such a great way to look at it. But I almost think, there was so much positivity within the reckoning. And I would think of another way of thinking of the reckoning rock would be like a coming home to who I really am, a coming home to nature. I mean, I can look at this from different perspectives, from sort of a purely physiological or biological level, or it can extend into more of a spiritual level. But I take it back to that idea of the houseplant of I was able to see, okay, here I am. What I learned from about 13 to about 24 was how to exercise very hard and some other related skills like how to work very hard at school and other things, right? I know. So I was a one trick pony of sorts. And I had to learn what it truly meant to eat well. I had to learn what it meant to sleep well. I had to learn what it meant to rest well. And then I gradually had to dig into the harder things of what it meant to have fulfilling work life, what it meant to have fulfilling relationships, all these things that are ultimately required to be well and to thrive.
Wow. I love that you said it was like a coming home to what is naturally you. And I could totally see how there's this spiritual aspect to this. I mean, that really resonates with me. It's sort of when you start to connect with that inner being and what that is and how much like we as an individual and a society create that.
It's super interesting, Rock, because we've gotten super deep in a short period of time, which I appreciate. And I think we can keep this deep and make it practical for people listening.
For our listeners. Thank you, Jason.
Everything that's in lifestyle medicine, everything that's in wellness coaching. So from a physiological perspective, if we can help a person meet more of their needs more of the time, every cell in their body will function better and good things happen and bad things are prevented, to say it simply, right? And then we can get into different elements of psychology that are part of wellness coaching, like intrinsic motivation and self-efficacy. And we can get into evidence-based methods that help people change. Deep to all of that, though, is ultimately this relationship with oneself that pop culture often, in pop culture, you hear it as quote unquote self-love. And I'm not against that term. I think, unfortunately, sometimes it bypasses the work that needs to be done, because what's there at the root of it, though, Rock, is the mechanism that's necessary to make lifestyle medicine work, which is that in order for me to proactively meet more of my needs more of the time, there is something like self-love happening. It's I'm a person, I have that need. I need to advocate on my behalf in some way. I need to make time for that need. I need to make energy for that need. I might need to ask for help from someone else to meet that need. And it's so fascinating because I would say that with every single client I work with, no matter what terminology we end up using around self-love, or there's a phrase I like, harmony with oneself, or no matter what one's spiritual orientation, in one way or another, they're building the muscle of coming into more harmony with themselves, loving themselves, advocating for themselves, however a person wants to think about it. And I just don't think we can play wellness coaching or lifestyle medicine without recognizing that it's not just a logistical endeavor, that this kind of stuff is at play.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I love that. I self-love that. No, I think you said something really practical, which is in the effort to love yourself, you can bypass some very important steps or some very important work. Right. And I hear that. I hear like I wouldn't say controversial what I'm going to say, but it is. But like there's this healthy at every size movement and like this movement to love yourself. And I have so many like feelings about that because on the one hand, I don't want people feeling shameful about themselves or how they look based on how they look because I felt that way my whole life. And like that's not that I don't want anyone to feel that way. And then on the other hand, like there are real health implications that aren't just theoretical, like they're actually happening to our population in real time from children all the way through adults.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't ignore those. And those are based on choices. And some are intentional, but many of them are things that people just aren't aware of.
Yeah, it's a conversation we all, those of us in lifestyle medicine in one way or another, I think need to be having more and more. And humbly, I'll say that I think people like you and I need to have prominent seats at that table because of our backgrounds. I have so much compassion for people who struggle to accept their body, even though it's been more than 20 years since I've felt whatever words we want to use, quote unquote overweight, quote unquote fat. That compassion will never, ever, ever, ever go away. And it also extends to things besides body composition. It extends to any form of not feeling good enough. Definitely any form of not good enough related to appearance or things like that. But it really extends to all forms of not feeling good enough. And I think things like the movement you talked about related to that is something I delve in my own way, play in the realm of the popular movement is called intuitive eating. They do some very good things to take pressure off, to take the focus on appearance off, to take the rules that come from diet culture away. And I think they can be important stepping stones. That said, I've never seen someone move into truly thriving without a simultaneous, I'll use your term that related to myself, but a simultaneous reckoning with truth and reality, as I said before, or with scientific evidence. My last thought on this, Rock, will be that I think those movements don't have enough confidence in what people are capable of. I think most people are capable of accepting something about themselves that they don't like, that isn't popularly accepted, and they're able to think about, I'm going to make some lifestyle improvements. I'm going to improve myself in various ways. And none of that means that I hate myself as I am right now. It's a nuanced paradox that a person has to be able to engage in to do this work. I won't be able to remember this, but I'll paraphrase. There's a Carl Jung quote, and the spirit of it is, only when you fully accept yourself will you be able to wholeheartedly improve yourself, or something like that. And what some of pop culture is stuck in is either I completely adore myself as I am and I don't need to change anything, or I absolutely abhor myself and I can't even stand myself. And I think even outside of body composition challenges, I think every single person walking around is dealing with some version of, I don't accept myself in some way, and I'm looking to improve. And the people who succeed in improving in a sustainable way and enjoying the process are able to find a way, or others are able to guide and support them as they find a way to embrace that I need to improve something. And it doesn't mean there's something fundamentally wrong with me. That was long-winded. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, what you're describing actually is, I think, mindfulness, being mindful about who you are. It's about being in the present, right? So I am this present person and I can love this present person. And this present person is capable of so much. And also the acknowledgement that there's always going to be change. It doesn't matter if you want it or not. I may love who I am today, but I'm not going to be the same person tomorrow. And so you can acknowledge that, oh, there is going to be change, but if you don't acknowledge it, then you won't have as much hand in impacting the outcome.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
So How do you reach someone then who's I agree. I hear what you're saying. It's really important. Like this all starts inward before any it's all this relationship that you have with yourself. And so many people have this complicated relationship with themselves. So how do you help people start to heal that or work on that or change that?
Well, it's a great question, and I think one thing that's interesting about it, from my perspective and from my experience, is that I would constructively challenge the idea that maybe that it starts from within, or that you have to take care of the inside first. My experience is that it's more of a taking care of the outside and taking care of the inside are concomitant. And in a way, we, by identifying something better I want to be experiencing and identifying what need might be unmet and starting to take action to start to meet that need better, it's in that acting on my behalf that I'm developing more of
Mm,
that harmony with myself. It's really neat because all a person needs to do, you don't need to do a lot of mental gymnastics or deep spiritual exploration. You can think of something you could be doing better. I'm looking across the room and I see my glass of water from earlier. As simple as, all right, I know maybe the person knows they want to lose some weight. Maybe the person knows they want to, their physician's talking with them about their blood pressure and they know they want to lower their blood pressure. So they have maybe a bit of an outcome goal in mind and they know some steps they want to take. One would be more broadly improving their nutrition. And they know a small step in that would be drinking more water. In the act of learning to drink more water over a few weeks, they're improving themselves physiologically. They're improving themselves psychologically. They're building self-efficacy. They're saying, I can drink more water.
mm,
And then on this deeper relationship with themselves level, almost as if themself were a friend of theirs or a child in their care, they're doing stuff
mm,
for themselves. And I think is another area where it's quite simple is, if there was a child in my care and they were hungry and I provided them with some nutritious food, that would be loving them. If I'm in my own care and I'm thirsty and I need some water and I provide that for myself, voila, I'm learning to love myself.
Take care of yourself in the right way. I used to think I was taking care of myself by like eating the food that I really loved. And so I think one thing that you're really distinguishing, and I see you do this when you write about it too, is like, what is real self love? As a society, we have some belief that, like, numbing our pain, that's really what we're often doing, is the form of self love.
Well, it's a great point, Rock. And I think that's why I don't use the term self-love a lot. That's why I like this idea of harmony with oneself, because I think the term self-love has been perverted. That might be too strong of a word, but it can mean like adoring oneself. It can mean sort of like self-righteousness, like never letting anyone tell you that you're wrong or you've made a mistake or anything like that. It can mean the kind of things you're talking about, yes, which unfortunately we can also do in relationship with others, right? Their mood is going down or they're not feeling their best. And in our heart or in our wisdom, we might know that they need to work through something challenging, but it can work to get them some chocolate or something like that, right? Like humans, people do this kind of thing, right? And to your point, we can do this for ourselves. I think one area that I do quite a bit of working with people is the realm of overcoming emotional eating. And we have this idea that I let people off the hook by helping them see that when they are stress eating or boredom eating, it's actually an adaptive behavior. They're feeling bad in some way and they're doing something for themselves, to your point. So in that way, we could describe that action as adaptive. But, and this is with no judgment from the outside, it's also maladaptive because it's causing that person a problem they don't want to have, whether it's excess weight, high blood pressure, high blood sugar levels, whatever it is. And there's also an opportunity cost because in the case of the boredom or the stress or the loneliness or the fatigue, those are the common drivers of emotional eating. They're not tending to what's making them bored, lonely, stressed, or tired.
Mm,
And what actually
mm,
behind the boredom, the loneliness, stress, or fatigue are some unmet needs that they could start practicing meeting on their behalf. So, if you're sort of, I don't know, what I'll call like raised with the average self-awareness, there's some learning to do. Now, this is where I'm grateful for my harder experiences because I think they were nature's way of helping me learn how to do all this, which I think is sort of innate to young children and innate to wild animals. And here's a beautiful thing about this process, Rock, is you sort of can't be wrong. You can tune into what you need, tune into what you think you need. You can meet that need, and then you can assess again. Do I feel better? Do I feel the same? Do I feel worse? And then rinse and repeat. I have some notes in front of me. I wrote down a quote before our conversation because I thought it would come up and I wanted to make sure I had the correct quote if this idea came up. You and listeners might be familiar with physician Gabor Mate. And he once said, the maintenance of health really depends on knowing who you are, getting in touch with your body, getting in touch with yourself, being mindful of all of that, and honoring who you are. And here's what I think is so cool about living that way. Less productive way of saying it would be, well, that's a bummer. I have to keep doing that. Like I have to meet the moment of life over and over and over again. Like I don't ever get to just say like, I have my degree in self-care and wellness and I'm done. I graduated, right? But instead of viewing that as a burden, I encourage people to view that as an opportunity. It means that no matter what went wrong yesterday, no matter what went wrong last year, today is a moment that you can say, what do I need more of today? What do I need to build more of in my life over the coming months? And how can I start doing this? I'll add one more thought to that is that we're social animals and these conversations are often done in the context of an individual orientation. But whether it's working with a physician, working with a wellness coach, being part of support groups, doing this alongside family members, there's a paradox here that this is self-care, but the people who succeed with self-care usually get a lot of help with self-care, if that makes sense.
I'm really loving this description that you're giving. I feel it too, like there's actually, you can look at it as a chore, like these are all these chores I have to do. Or are you familiar with Michelle Seeger?
Yes, not well, but I know who you're referring to. Yes.
Okay. All right. Actually, well, that episode will be released. We just recently had her on the podcast, and that's her whole work is like how she gets people to look at what she started with exercise, but now it's really like all healthy behaviors, how to shift from thinking of them as chores to looking at them as gifts. And really, like, what does exercise give you, for example? People look at it as something healthy. And we had a fascinating conversation about how things like food as medicine may actually be counterproductive because people are patients are hearing that, people are hearing that, and it's like, oh, food becomes another chore. But that's not what food is for people. Like food ideally is something that you use to like share love and show, and you can do all of that with different ingredients that are also healthier. And that's how we should be framing it as opposed to as a medicine, which, is really, anyway, that's an aside. But when you're describing like how we look at our well-being as an opportunity, as a beautiful opportunity, I mean, it really, I think that's what's needed.
It helps quite a bit, Rock. And I think to play off the conversation you had with Michelle, I think there's a powerful, powerful, powerful idea there, which not everyone's ready for at the beginning of their wellness journey in our very goal-oriented culture. But you're really playing with fire if you can get to where you eat the nutritious food because you enjoy it, or you do the exercise because you enjoy it. It isn't a means to an end. That's a superpower. That's where we want every person to be, where the action is the reward. And so that's a realm that is super important for people to be thinking about. I'll share a psychological concept that will help people see this distinction a little more clearly, which is when we do something, it can have instrumental benefits. That means I do this and it gets me this, or it can have experiential benefits. That is, doing it in and of itself is the reward, as I was saying, is the benefit. And I'll share an anecdote. This is from a physician local to me, and we were having a conversation about lasting behavior improvement and positive habit formation. He was sort of picking my mind. And as many people do, he sort of said in a frustrated tone, how do I get more of my patients to exercise? And I make clear to them how important it is. And I know this guy well, and I know that he loves to ski in the wintertime, downhill ski in the wintertime, and he loves to play ultimate frisbee in the summertime. So I asked him, when you get out of a day of work, you're maybe a little tired. There are things waiting for you at home to be done. There's family waiting for you. There are things pulling you in different directions. What gets you over to the field to play ultimate frisbee? And he says, the people, like the fresh air, being outside after a day of being inside. And I said back to him, not to be flippant, but to make this point, you didn't say to me, so I don't get dementia 3 or 4 or 5 decades from now. So I don't get type 2 diabetes like my grandfather did. Like, that wasn't what got him there. Is that idea making sense?
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's exactly it. It's all the good things that it's bringing him, not the kind of way we frame it in healthcare.
It's the good things. And this is a powerful paradox. It's relatively immediate things too. This just isn't part of medicine. This is part of our culture at large. The idea that the key to success in something like lifestyle medicine is delayed gratification. And there's some merit to that idea. There's a lot less merit than most people think, though. And I think if Michelle Seeger were listening in, she would have a lot to say about this. It's actually about helping people find the intersection between that which is beneficial in the long run and that which is super enjoyable in the short run. With food, I have a silly term I use to drive this home. I don't encourage people to eat nutritious food. I encourage people to eat Nutrilicious food. I put the words nutritious and delicious together.
Nutritious and delicious together. I love that.
And I can't think, there's not a catchy way to do this with exercise, but we want the same idea is if you're thinking, I got to do X that stinks so that I can get Y years or decades from now that doesn't stink, there's not a lot of motivation going on there.
Yeah. I think the thing that people then struggle with, and maybe it's just how we frame it, is it should feel good now. Like when people are starting something, I'm going to ask you that, like, so starting something new, some new behavior, there is an adjustment period where it doesn't necessarily feel good.
Yes, good point. Good point. It needs to be worked with. And maybe it's important to think of these terms not in the absolutes of feels good or feels bad, but we want to make them feel.
Come on, Jason, everything is absolute. Don't you know our society? Everything has to be black and white. Everything has to be.
We just want to make them feel as good as possible. And what's interesting, this is a psychological concept, but I often analogize it with physics in the sense of, that's going to hurt physically or something that's going to be very boring. We experience that as friction or resistance. And, a ball won't roll across a pool table if there's a bump in the felt, right? There's a crease, right? It's going to stop it. So maybe I'm having a conversation with a client and I'll start with, what kinds of movement do you enjoy? And they come back with nothing. I don't enjoy anything. So then I'll come back with, what's something you could tolerate? And they'll have something, right? I could walk on the treadmill. There's a gym at the office. I could walk on the treadmill. And they're ready to do it. They're ready to do it. They're acknowledging it's going to be mostly tedious and boring, but they're ready to do it. And then I'll ask them an open-ended question. What could you do to make it 5 or 10% more enjoyable? I might even use their language and say, what would you use to make it 5 or 10% less tedious and boring? And let them come up with an answer. It might be listen to a podcast. It might be watch a show. It might be see if someone else will do it with me, something. But what we're trying to do is reduce that psychological friction or resistance the best we can until it starts to feel a little better. I mean, it's kind of fun when that person comes back to you 6 weeks later and they say, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually kind of want to go exercise next week. So it's a good point. Depending on how long the previous habits and the previous mindset has been entrenched, you don't flip a switch and go to enjoying it all. But that's another important factor though, Rock, which is the small steps thing, right? So, one thing that causes people a lot of trouble with this stuff is the idea represented by the saying, go big or go home, right? So they're like, all right, it's April 1st. I've got 40 pounds to lose and I'm going all in, and all in, could mean different things to different people, but it's usually a large leap from what they're currently doing. And the larger the leap, the harder the process, the more likely the failure. To summarize this simply, when we try to take too big of a step, our chances of failing are higher. That leads to self-talk like, I knew I couldn't do it. I stink. Maybe this isn't the right time. They can sort of talk themselves out of it. Whereas take a small step, the self-talk is usually like, I haven't exercised in 5 years. Look at me. I'm exercising. I want to do more next week. That's very important.
You're like building a self identity for yourself in either the wins, the small wins, like as you said, you're building an identity. I'm someone who can do this. Like go back to like when you were just talking about like drinking a glass of water. I'm someone that can do this. I can decide on a change and actually make it and move forward, make progress. Or, yeah, I'm someone who always fails, can't do this, forget about it. And I love that you're helping people, first of all, just even build that level of awareness that they have this identity. Like you're probably exploring what is your current belief system around your abilities and then also giving them like a little bit of a roadmap. Like, yeah, the next couple weeks, the next few weeks as you're trying something new may feel a little different on the body. And you don't know, I don't know when the day comes when you call me up and say, I actually kind of looking forward to it next week. That's pretty cool.
It's fun to be able to share anecdotes from, anonymously, with confidentiality, but anecdotes from other clients. More recently, I've had the pleasure of sharing anecdotes about my dad. It's particularly fun because my brothers and I have, as many family members do, wanted to see him taking better care of himself in certain ways over the last 5 or 10 years. As a small aside, he worked with a colleague of mine, a wellness coach that went through training with me at the same time at the Mayo Clinic. And that the aside is, don't try to coach your family members. That people don't tend to take even very well done coaching. But my dad, with my colleagues' help, has gone from, I would just sort of describe him as like the standard, typical attitude of people in the United States about food and movement. And he's doing well in both realms. But with exercise, he jokes, but he's only half joking. He says, I'm actually sort of a fitness nut, I think he'll say, enthusiast. And he means it. Like he's got his walks, he's got an indoor place, he's got a few indoor places, he's got a few outdoor places. And no matter what the weather is, he finds a way to walk, and not begrudgingly and not because he has to. He comes back and says, I always feel better on days when I have a good walk. It's such a cool thing to see happen for people. I'll add a thought about this, Rock, that I think you'll enjoy and listeners will enjoy, is some of the things diet culture and boot camp culture get very extreme, right? It's that sort of go big or go home. And I think for a lot of people who want to be taking better care of themselves and want to be living with better wellness, they look to that world, and for lack of a better term, that world looks quote unquote weird to them. And I think one thing that we can do as lifestyle medicine professionals, as a physician, as a wellness coach, is to truly normalize it. Like it doesn't have to be all those extreme things you see doing on the edges. And what's very, 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 very cool about that is I work with what I would call these, regular people all the time. But when a regular person has a transformation where they learn to take great care of themselves and their well-being expands and expands and expands, all these things that we consider regular, being a teacher or being a nurse or being a parent or being a grandparent or whatever it is, they do it with 10, 20, 30, 50, 100% more mojo, because, slowly getting sicker and sicker and sicker is sort of like a wet blanket. And then gradually getting happier and healthier and happier and healthier and happier and healthier is like, if the sound was muted, it's like the sound coming back on, or if the color was black and white, it's like the color now being full color. And that's what this is about. To me, that's what this is about. Yeah, the statistics are neat, right? Like it's neat to think about less obesity and less type 2 diabetes and all the things, but these are not people on a, epidemiological balance sheet. These are individuals with family members and living in neighborhoods and all these things. And when they light up, so to speak, when they come back to life, when they perk up, to use the houseplant analogy, it's awesome for them, and they're bringing more to everyone around them, and it's wonderful.
Oh, I love this, Jason. That's beautiful. I'm getting chills. It ripples. It ripples into this world because they're now this better version of, I don't want to say that they were like a worse version of themselves before, but they are a newer version of themselves that is really operating, in a way that they feel better, and because of that, they can spread that goodness out into the world, and it ripples. I don't know how many times you must see like person changes, then partner changes, and kids, it's not that they change because you're working with them, it's they see the example and the energy that's kind of being put out by that individual.
Mhm.
So I want to pivot a little bit, Jason. We're talking a lot about the individual,
Mhm.
and I want to just talk about the system as a whole. And I'd say that not to like, we don't have to have like a big bash session about, we can, about how all the problems right now, but really, what is the way forward? What is the solution? And I'm sure in coaching, you often will have people with a litany of like complaints about the system and healthcare, and I hear that too. And I always like to focus on solutions because that's what we have more control over. So I'd love to get your take on it because you're in the midst of, I would say a lot of people probably open up to you, I'm guessing, about the failings of like traditional healthcare.
It's a great area to explore. And other than that Gabor Mate quote, that was the only quote I wrote down that I thought would be a good part of this conversation. But another one comes to mind, which is Buckminster Fuller. And the spirit of something he said was, you don't make things better by fighting the and existing system. You make things better by creating a new system that's so good that it makes the old system obsolete. The spirit of that is so much more helpful than trying to dismantle or break down the things that we can all see as dysfunctional. Um, I really think there's some headway being made. The amount of physicians and nurse practitioners and physician assistants and wellness coaches and physical therapists and occupational therapists that are involved in lifestyle medicine organizations, and the amount that are trying very hard to present something better, and taking some risks in doing so, in taking they're sort of swimming against they might be doing things differently than the people they went to medical school with or graduate school with. They might, and they're certainly in many cases taking, at least for a period of time, financial risks by practicing in these newer ways. But the people I know who are doing so can't unsee what they've seen. Another physician I know told me this a few years ago. He described what he got into in residency and what he was mentored to move into with this pithy saying. I got to see if I can remember it. It's test, pill, bill. So it's like
Okay.
brutally efficient, right? Run a test, prescribe a pill, send out a bill. There's sort of no denying the efficiency, but there's also sort of no denying the, I guess, lack of humanity, in there, right?
And ineffectiveness. Yeah.
So I think we're moving. Well, I think these conversations help. I think all forms of writing, all forms of public speaking. Here's an interesting idea. Sometimes people ask me, do you get a lot of referrals from physicians and other medical professionals? And my answer is some, probably not as many as you would expect. And that said, it's all good because what I get are a lot of people from the public coming directly to me. And here's what I think is fascinating, Rock. I think the public might lead this movement more than people within the medical system, because what these people say to me in words, or say to me say to me directly in words, or say to me indirectly in words, is nothing in that system is providing me what I need to get to where I want to get here. What I've heard about you, what people have told me about you, can help me get there. And by get there, all I mean is to learn to eat better, exercise more, take great care of myself holistically. We're approaching building toward a critical mass of the public that is saying that even if they don't have the information you and I have, Rock, that somewhere between 80 and 90% of money spent on medical care is going to ailments that are reversible and preventable. They might not know that statistic, but they can feel that statistic in their bone. They can look around at life. They can look around in their neighborhoods, in their workplaces, in their schools and say, wow, most of what's getting us these days are these lifestyle ailments. And most of what prevents and reverses them are simple things I can do. But you know what? I've also found change is hard, and darn it, I need some help with that. And like I said, they're not seeing that in too many places, but they're starting to see it from wellness coaches and other people working directly in lifestyle medicine.
Wow, that is such a clear way of, I think, and thank you for your hope and optimism. I have that too. I believe that there is this movement. I agree with you. It's not some of it is coming from within healthcare, of course. I mean, we're within healthcare in that sense, but a lot of it, maybe the momentum will really rely on it coming from individuals, because you're right. They're the ones. That's why I asked the question, because I'm constantly now, when I'm meeting people who find me, it's often because they don't feel like, I mean, they're not probably wrong. Like there isn't an emphasis on helping them make behavior change, or to ask like sort of what root causes might be, causing them to have chronic disease and how they might address that. And I mean, so what you're saying, and I Buckminster Fuller quote, like, it totally makes sense to me. I think what we're creating, and I would say also better system, it's a system that emphasizes, at the root of it, emphasizes the thing you said, which is like coming in harmony with yourself, being in harmony with yourself. Like that is the sort of core of it. And then your well-being, because we don't even talk about well-being in healthcare. I mean, the name healthcare is such a misnomer. Health has become absence of disease. It's pretty much like the definition of the standard of health in healthcare. And, you don't interact with the system if you have absence of disease.
Point to something I think is very interesting, and this will be challenging to some people. I think it's necessary, which is this shift. I'll just say it directly to start. The shift requires more participation from patients/clients. When I say some members of the public are leading this transformation, this shift, I think of them like the first people that got smartphones or whatever. Like they're willing to do something that other people aren't willing to do. That many people aren't willing to do. They're willing to take some risks that other people aren't willing to do at that time. And in this case, the risk or the extra effort seems to be this being willing or even eager to take a more active role in one's well-being. And I think we need to be candid about that when we make our outreach. Now, it's a tough sell, right? I mean, it's easier to sell, hey, come to me and I'll do all the work and you can get where you want to get.
And you take a pill.
That's right. A fun way to talk about this distinction is, this is super well-intentioned when people say, wouldn't it be better if every physician prescribed food as medicine or prescribed movement as medicine? My answer to that question is yes, and however, when you get into lifestyle medicine, you need more than prescription. You need help with implementation. So we need to be having that conversation. That here's the way I like to think about that process of implementation, though, is, so one way to think about it is the pill is easy and quick, and lifestyle is sort of like arduous and forever. That to me is a false dichotomy. What I see in real life is the pill is quick and easy when a person has full-throated accountability, guidance, and support, full-throated help with implementation. It's like taking a course. They invest 3 months or 6 months or maybe a year, and they learn how to do this stuff in a way that it becomes relatively easy. So yes, there's some effort to get this going. The analogy I like for this is teaching a kid how to ride a bike. You would never just say to a kid who's never ridden a bike before, go ride, fall down all the time, get all kinds of gnarly cuts and bruises and maybe even worse, right? Broken bones. And that's how you're going to learn. But you
Right.
also wouldn't tell a kid, I'm going to put training wheels on your bike and you're going to keep them on your bike until you're 25. What I think of as very good wellness coaching is I'm a professional, they're the client on one level, but on another level, we're peers. We're both adults that I fully know in my bones they can learn to do what I'm doing. They simply need some training wheels while they're learning. They need some accountability, guidance, and support to learn. And that offer, I think, is more appealing to people that this is something I can learn at 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 or 70. I can learn it in a period of time and then I've got it. And to our earlier ideas, Rock, no one should feel ashamed that they didn't learn it when they were a kid. No one should be ashamed they didn't learn it to this point in adulthood. We're not living in an environment that it's easy to learn this stuff. So there's no shame in needing to make this a focus of your life for 6 months and get some good help with it and learn it. And then what a gift to yourself. And for our idea about Ripple, what a gift to everyone around you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you're saying, like, yeah, there may be certainly this transition where you're learning new things, you don't know how to do certain things. And this will become like there's almost like an ease that will come into your life. As you do these things, the rest of life gets easier. So, where the pill promises like it's quick and easy in the moment, it doesn't give you any of those things. In fact, it might actually perpetuate those things, all the difficulty that you have in your life. So in that sense, I mean, you talked about it earlier in reference to something else, but the opportunity cost. I've never really thought about it, but like there's an opportunity cost to the pill. It's not just that it's less effective. It's also like preventing people from making the bigger changes that are going to lead to a more fulfilling life.
I like to play and work with words to make important distinctions. And so I go out of my way to not use the term side effects because to me it's benign, right? The things that are called side effects are actually side problems, right? They're things you don't want to have, nausea and headaches and things like that, right? And then to make a contrast, I say when you apply lifestyle medicine, you get side benefits. So someone could go into wanting to apply lifestyle medicine only because they want to not move from pre-diabetes to type 2 diabetes. That could be the only initial reason for doing it. And they do a good job and they don't get type 2 diabetes. In fact, hopefully hopefully they don't stay in pre-diabetes. They're back down into normal or optimal blood sugar levels. But then lo and behold, it wasn't even their intention, wasn't their goal. They're sleeping better. They have more energy. They're more productive at work. They take the self-efficacy that came from doing something they didn't think they could do, and that extends into other areas of their lives. This happens all the time when I work with people. I like the saying, how you do one thing is how you do anything, or how you do one thing is how you do everything. It happens all the time. A person sort of slays this dragon that has been a hard thing for their life, and they say, I'm going to make a big career change. I'm going to write that book. I'm going to reach out to my brother or sister that I've been estranged from for 3 or 4 or 5 years. All of that happens as a result of things like losing 20, 30 or 40 pounds or getting one blood sugar levels in the normal range because person is learning they can do things on their behalf and they can do things they previously thought were seemingly impossible. When those things become eminently doable, that ripples. So anyway, I just think this is an important part of the lifestyle medicine conversation is we're working with people and it can be messy, it can be hard, it can be challenging. And people are awesome. I say this all the time. I say people are awesome because one thing that bugs me, Rock, is when I write an article or I read a post and it's about all the benefits of eating well, or it's all the benefits of exercising. And people put in the comments, yeah, but most people don't give a crap and most people are lazy, these kinds of comments. And I just don't think it's just not helpful. And I get where it's coming from. It can be frustrating, especially if someone in your life that you care about, that you wish was taking better care of. It can be easy to say people just don't care or people are lazy or people suck or whatever. But my experience is that most people, given a chance, given some authentic guidance and support, will not only do okay with this kind of stuff, they'll often surprise you in pretty cool ways and people will surprise you if you give them a chance.
They surprise themselves. But I hear you. It's just we have to give people the chance. It's more than giving people the chance. It's actually recognizing that this is an inherent ability of everyone. We don't have to give anyone a chance. We just have to acknowledge the truth, which is that there's nothing special about, you or me being able to take control of our health. We maybe had circumstances that motivated us to go on that path, and then guidance, importantly, external guidance and support wouldn't have gone anywhere without that. And that honestly is one of the biggest takeaways I from our conversation is you said, we always talk about starting inward, but nothing changes without the external supporting the internal. And that's so true. And we can lose sight of that.
I think this might be a neat idea to tie some of this together. This is from a colleague of mine, and this is his thing. He loves to talk about this, and I cheer him on for talking about this. His thing is we need to normalize guidance and support. We need to normalize the idea that you're not the only one that's found it hard to do this by yourself. Ideas that he and I share in common that we like are things like learning a language or learning to play an instrument. Yes, technically, I could go online, find a do-it-yourself course, listen to some YouTube videos, and struggle through teaching myself, so to speak, right? It would be much easier, much faster, much more enjoyable if I found a good language teacher or found a good music teacher. And, per my example earlier, my analogy earlier with training wheels, I don't need a language teacher for the rest of my life. I don't need a guitar teacher or whatever instrument I'm trying to learn teacher for the rest of my life. But to get started when you're learning something new, it's incredibly helpful. I sometimes say with wellness coach colleagues that we'll have made it when on a popular sitcom, one of the main characters has a wellness coach. That happened for other fields, in recent decades, like counseling/therapy, right? And it became the positive sense of normalized. I think between lifestyle medicine physicians and wellness coaches and wellness centers of various kinds, the more it becomes normalized that a person has their moment when they say, I need to make some lifestyle improvements, their first instinct isn't, I need to make some lifestyle improvements all by myself, darn it. But their first instinct is, I'm going to go to that place my brother went, or I'm going to work with that coach my sister worked with, or I'm going to work with that lifestyle physician my dad worked with. Does that make some sense?
Yeah. Wow. I love that. Yeah. It's normalizing it and then having an ecosystem where people are like utilizing these services regularly. Like, I have these options now, like, because this is a goal of mine, not just mine, like many people in society are working on their well-being. As a society, I think that is like a beautiful thing to aspire towards. Like, I would love it if you looked around and that was just a sort of societal aspiration. Sometimes it feels like we're really far from that. And I love just you sort of look at the reality present day world. And it's like there are lots of us, increasing number of us talking about this, doing this. And then sometimes it feels like, I live in California, and like when there are wildfires, it's like they have firefighters from other states come and they've got this huge team, like it's growing and growing, but the fires are growing faster. So one thing I love that you said that I'm really going to focus on is instead of thinking about putting out the fire, how can I focus on what we're building, like the new trees we're planting or the new system that we're creating? Because that fire will get put out and, hopefully there won't be another one. But if we have something better so people aren't in that fire danger territory in the first place, then we're not going to have to worry about it.
Yeah, I think my optimism, my positive outlook might come from my biased perspective that I get to swim in this culture of helping people with this week in and week out. But it wouldn't take long for me to, I think it was last fall, I visited a relative in their local hospital, and it wasn't hard to see, that the general culture there wasn't supporting the kinds of ideas we're talking about. I don't know a better way, Rock, than each of us doing this is the same colleague I mentioned earlier about normalizing, getting help with this stuff, often talks about this is a grassroots movement, meaning no one's, I think people are trying, but so far no one's got some sort of a magic wand that allows them to make more change faster. I think the reason for that is it really requires that work on that personal level. What I'm trying to say is that lifestyle medicine and wellness coaching are relatively hard to scale because of that, the intensive nature of the work that has to get done. And I've kind of accepted that, then embraced it and said, that's okay. I can't do it alone. Rock can't do it alone. But for every other wellness coach that I mentor to help them have a robust practice, and every other physician, that you get interested in making lifestyle medicine be part of their practice. I mean, what the image in my mind is sort of like the opposite of a wildfire. We're spreading like a wildfire, but we're spreading something that is helpful.
Right. Yeah. It's like we're planting seeds. And that's a different way of looking at it. Instead of putting out a fire, we're planting seeds, right? Because ultimately, like, we're growing something new, both on a systemic level and for individuals. And I hear you. Like, I definitely like now I think focus on like, okay, what is the work I can do with individuals? Because we don't even know, like, there's no way to quantify that ripple effect. And, how much benefit is there from, I don't know, like spending my whole career trying to change clinical practice in the current system versus all the people I could impact? You don't know. So I think there's some faith there that I also believe in.
I think there are people working on other levels that are at least outside of my scope of expertise. People working in public wellness, people doing things like working on school education, education programs, school lunch programs. Those are all things that are approaching this challenge from other angles that are incredibly
All related. I was going to say that too. I think on like systemic level, like there are people working on this in the government. Like in some places you see more success than New York is a great example because the mayor of New York reversed his diabetes with lifestyle changes, with a plant-based diet. And so Eric Adams is all about this. And they've brought lifestyle medicine programs into the county hospitals in the city. And the meals now they offer, like, I mean, these aren't like revolutionary. I mean, they are revolutionary changes, but it's quite remarkable to see.
I think that's heartening to know that there are government officials that have a set of skills that are helpful. There are academics that have a set of skills that are helpful. There are, as I mentioned, public wellness officials that have a set of skills that are helpful. And I try to rest in the idea that if I do my part with enthusiasm and they do their part with enthusiasm, that we at least have the potential to see some of the more widespread improvements that all of us would love to see.
Yeah, and it's probably like you said, like on an individual level, when somebody makes small changes and small changes and small changes, and then like before they know it, they've made some bigger changes. Like it's probably true on a societal level too. Like we're not going to see this like one day, like suddenly tomorrow I wake up and it's like, it's a different system. We're like in the midst of that transition, and that's just going to continue to evolve. And I choose to believe, and it sounds like you choose to believe, which I appreciate, is like that we are evolving to a system that does focus on the relationship we have with ourself and harmonizing that relationship and having an emphasis on our well-being, not just absence of disease. We're always going to need care for disease and illness and broken bones. And I'm glad that exists. And I'm also really glad that we're working on creating something that imagines a better vision for people in this world.
Unless I accept the idea that sort of life as we know, we're on the brink of Armageddon, then I think it's essentially inevitable, Rock. And I think there's some irony in here in that some of the hesitation or what slowed the movement in the direction we're talking about is the idea that it's expensive. Whether we're talking about things like a hospital serving more nutritious food, or we're talking about an individual investing in wellness coaching for themselves, those ideas exist. I think,
Sure.
however, that, and I'm far from an economist, but I think there are so many economic and financial problems escalating and escalating and escalating that even people who aren't coming from the perspective of we can make people's lives better, that it feels great to live a longer life and a happier, healthier life. I think eventually certain people slash groups of people are going to have to move in the lifestyle medicine direction because at some point it's going to become the more affordable. Like, does that idea make some sense?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I feel like it already is, but it's like also short-term versus long-term costs. I think, I don't know. I struggle with this. Like, how do people not see the payoff? But I think also health insurance works in the very short term, is what I understand. Like, they're really just concerned about short-term costs because people change insurance a lot, so they're not really. I mean, this is how the system is just so devoid of humanity, as you said earlier, anyway, which tells us that we have a lot of work to do. And it's wonderful to have positive attitude and optimism as we create something new. Jason, I want to ask you one question we ask everybody who comes to the health feast. You're coming to the proverbial health feast, but instead of a dish of food, you're going to bring your life philosophy or mindset tip that you live by. And what might Jason bring to the health feast?
All right, I'm going to cheat and give two. And we've covered both of them already, but I'll bring them back in summary. The first one is that Gabor Mate quote again, which I'll read so I get right again. The maintenance of health really depends on knowing who you are, getting in touch with your body, getting in touch with yourself, being mindful of all of that, and honoring who you are. That, to me, if a person could reflect on that idea and let it sink in and start practicing it, that would be huge. And then the second idea, I'm just increasingly big on this idea that we're social animals and we thrive on, I use this strong term, fierce interdependence, meaning we need each other. We need to depend on each other. We need to count on each other. So whether that's in our personal relationships, in our professional relationships, or in both, remembering the idea that, yes, no one's going to live your life for you, but also try not to be too stubbornly independent and think you need to do all of the hard things in life by yourself. Sort of find the middle path there and create kinds of personal and professional relationships that help you thrive.
Thank you so much. Well, Jason, this has been I loved, we had such a good flow to our conversation. I feel like I learned so much, and you have now meeting you in person, especially, I already knew this, but you have such a warm and giving energy. Really, your whole being is about exposing the truths, but in the way that you do it, it's because you want to uplift others. And that really comes through in just talking to you and hearing why you do the work you do. And yeah, I feel it, man. So anyway, I really appreciate you coming on, sharing this conversation. Folks want to work with you if they want to find out more about you.
Best way to get in touch with me is through my website. My business is called Puvema, Puvema, and my website is simply puvema.com. And that's where you can find everything you want to know about me and find my social media links and all that good stuff.
What's the origin of the name of the business?
I thought you might ask. You'll appreciate it. It's a good story. I'm building my practice slash business and got the business advice to come up with a name that was bigger than me, was the advice I got. And you've heard me in this conversation use the word thrive a handful of times. I like that word. To make a long story short, that's a very popular word. So to find a name that you can get the trademark for, to find a name that you can get the domain name for that has anything like that, impossible. So then I got the advice, make up a word, like Zoom or Exxon, or like many car makes and models, right? And I just didn't have it in me to come up with a name that didn't mean anything. And so I did a little idea storming. And like I said, I'm a reader and a writer and a words person. And I'm a quotes person, as you can tell from this conversation. And one of my favorite quotes is, "The greatest wealth is health." And the man who said that is known as Virgil, but his full name is Publius Virgilius Maro. And Puvema is the first two letters of each of his three names. So it makes a word that's easy to say. It's a consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. And it's got a story behind it. That's the story.
Really cool. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for all the work you're doing in this space and for really leading the way and for being a voice of reason in the midst of a lot of insanity, I would say. So I really appreciate you, Jason. Really appreciate you coming. And then we do our customary fist bump up to the camera. There we go. Nice, man. All right. We'll see you all back here next time on the next episode of the Health Feast. Live well and rock on, everyone.